Okay, so now that we have covered that, let's actually get started and create some queries on our page. So I'm going to go to, let's actually start up this page. Oh man. Open containing folder, and then I'm going to open this, and this is what we left off with. So as you can see, when we're resizing the page, some things are happening. The text is reflowing itself because it's not jumping off the page, and that's because we did the max width to be 100% of the screen instead of some fixed number. But it's not really getting smaller. This page just kind of becomes less and less usable. When we get over here, the navigation breaks down even, and it's just not very pretty. Although, one nice thing is that these inline block elements are automatically reflowing themselves in a nice way, that it's centered.
All right, so we've got something going well then.
Yeah, we have one thing done, several things to go. So before we get into how to style all of these different things, let's start by talking about what are some of the different breakpoints that we want for reflowing this page. I'm going to pick. So let's go over here into our code, into style.css, and I'm just going to put these in line at the bottom here. Instead of putting these in different files, because we're not going to do too many. Oh, oops, caps lock. And I'm going to start off by doing sort of the mobile view. So I'm just going to do if the minimum screen width is under 700 pixels, that's typically something that you consider a mobile device. There are countless mobile devices out there, but generally their width, generally the width is going to be somewhere between 690 to 600, somewhere below 700 pixels, and I think that's a good breakpoint. So which media query should we use? Let's go back here and see. We have a couple of options, right? We know that these are going to definitely be screens. They're definitely going to be devices that, computer screens. So we should start with a screen. And then next, we have to pick some media features that we're going to query this on. Like I said, I'm just going to have this, so a set of features appear for if the device if the width of the window is under 700. So I can use the min device, or the min width property, or the max width property, sorry, and it's going to look something very much like this, except it would be max width, obviously. So going back here, I'm going to do screen and then max width, 700 pixels, and then I'm going to put in some properties under there, and then I'm going to give this some comments that say mobile. And then we also have that sort of middle ground that we talked about. Somewhere between a phone and a desktop, there's a lot. And so I'm going to create something for that. I'd say that most desktop pages, that something's a rather large desktop when the width is generally above like 960. So I'm going to do somewhere between 700 pixels and 960 as sort of another break in our page.
Okay.
So I do sort of the same thing, media, screen, and then I'll set, so I need to set both ends. So if the min width is above 700 pixels and max width is 960 pixels. And I'm going to set that. I did something bad because it's not syntax highlighting in a way that I want. Is it this? What did I do here?
Space. Screen space.
Ah, thank you.
You're welcome.
It might have worked, but it didn't look like it would work, and that's always a worrying thing. And this is going to be sort of our medium sized. That's not super descriptive, but I think it'll go a long way.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave these empty for now because I want to talk about some of the considerations that you want to make in resizing your page. So that would be deciding and styling content. The first thing that we do want to do is decide on our breaking points. We've already done that. We want a certain look for devices that are probably handheld, something with their width being under 700. We also want something for like a medium-sized device, and then our default look will be for basically your standard issue website on a large screen, on a desktop, something like that. Some of the important considerations we need to do when we're scaling down is we want to optimize our text. Our text size right now is pretty huge. It's definitely heading sized, but as you're scaling down, the devices are smaller, the resolution is already higher, but you don't need something that's that large. So we're going to want to scale down our text size. And in the same way, we want to scale down our image size as well. We only really have one image in there, but I want to scale that down to be smaller and smaller. And actually, if it's a really small device, I don't actually need to see that CSS3 logo.
Yeah.
That is nice. It's something to, take up some space on the page, but it's not strictly necessary, right? And it's all about sort of finding out what is actually necessary to keep on the page. So let's say that's not necessarily to keep on the page. We can just hide that element at some point. And something else that's important is, adjusting your touch targets. We don't have too many touch targets in here, but something that we saw, for example, in the on the Square site is as you're scaling down, instead of having text buttons, they switched that down to sort of an easy touch target image button. And it might be nice to actually increase the touch target size on those elements as well, so that if a user is clicking very close to it, you know that they probably want to click that element, and then you'll use that as a target as well. It's just nice things to add in that you don't really need to add in for large devices.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would actually kind of dovetail off of that with two real quick things. Number one, on the image, that keep in mind that if you hide it, that display none on CSS, the image is still sent down. And unfortunately, making an image dynamic isn't as easy as it should be. There are a couple little tricks that you could use with CSS, like a background image, or there is eventually going to be an HTML5 picture element that you can use so that you can detect the device size and choose whether or not you actually want to send the image down. But keep in mind that if you just simply say display none, it's still sent down. Now for our conversation, that's fine, but real world, it's something you might want to keep in mind. And if I can mention, again, going back to another MVA, we actually did an MVA on targeting mobile devices. And so we actually have a full conversation about things like, touch targets, implementing touch, and then also going in and showing off the different ways that you can change image size based on the device and only send down the right sized image for a phone, for a mobile device.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, in fact, something we're going to talk about later, CSS preprocessors, that can help a lot as well.
Yes.
And the import statements, right? So if, for instance, if you're only importing a certain CSS style or certain CSS style sheet over to the page for mobile, and you're importing another one for sort of desktop sites, then as Chris said, you can use sort of like the background image as a URL and to get specifically the image that you want. For our purposes, we're just going to do a pretty simple, hey, when the page resizes, the image gets smaller. And that's something that's just useful. And the last is to use relative sizing. So relative sizing is something that we already put into our page right from the get-go. We had just as a reminder, we had margins of sort of 10% on the left and the right. And when the page scales down, that 10% is going to get smaller and smaller. So we won't be having this like fat 100-pixel border on each side, for instance, when we're on a tiny device. That'll actually get smaller and be sort of relative to the device size. And that's something that is incredibly useful to have. As well as what we talked about before, having those inline elements that automatically reflow themselves. So useful for if you're creating something that needs to be seen on multiple screens.
Yep.
So